Hey everyone, this is Mrs. Mallard and this is Unit 10, Lesson 1. And our topic for this lesson is on natural selection. This is the first lesson in the evolution unit. Our goal for today is to understand what the process of natural selection is. And our other goal is for you to understand two examples of natural selection, one being pesticide resistance and the other example being antibiotic resistance. So first of all, we're going to start off with Charles Darwin, also known as the father of evolution. So his name is always linked to evolution. And he proposed that organisms change, aka organisms evolve, through a process called natural selection. So natural selection, that's kind of the key term that we're going to be focusing on in this lesson. And Charles Darwin, he's the one that proposed this mechanism called natural selection. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take the term natural selection and basically break it down. So the first part about natural selection is Darwin noticed that among organisms of the same species that there are these different variations between organisms that are the same type of organism. So we're going to do just a very simplified example with giraffes. So our variation here is that we have some giraffes with short necks and some giraffes with long necks. So that's going to be our variation among our giraffe population. The second thing about natural selection is some of the variations that our organisms have are better than others. So in this particular instance, giraffes that have a really long neck are able to reach the leaves at the top of the tree and therefore they are able to eat. Giraffes that have shorter necks are going to not be able to reach the top of the trees to eat, so they are at a disadvantage. All right, so we talked about our giraffes with short necks and our giraffes with long necks, and we said that the giraffes that had the better variation were the ones with the long necks. They're the ones that are able to reach the top of the trees and eat. Those are the ones that are going to be able to survive. So giraffes with the long necks, they can reach the food, they can survive. If you survive, you have a better chance of reproducing, having giraffe babies. All right. So you have a better chance of reproducing if you survive. And by reproducing, the hope is that you are passing on that good trait or that better variation or that gene for having a long neck onto your offspring. So that kind of sums up natural selection. So once again, organisms have variation. Some variations are better than others. The variations that are better, those are the ones that are going to survive. They're going to reproduce. They're going to pass on the trait. The first example that we're going to look at is pesticide resistance. So first of all, some of you might not know what a pesticide is, but these are just chemicals that kill pests. So some of you might have a can of like roach spray or ant spray in your house. These are all pesticides that people use in their house. Now, farmers on a much larger scale, they use pesticides on their crops in order to kill insects. So on a much larger or much commercial scale, farmers they use a large amount because they're trying to make sure that they kill insects that might be nibbling on their crops. So let's talk about what pesticides have to do with natural selection. So some organisms or some insects have a mutation that makes them resistant to pesticides. So what this means is that if the organism gets sprayed with the chemical, for whatever reason, they have a DNA mutation that makes them resistant. So it could be that the mutation makes their exoskeleton, so kind of like on their outside part, makes it extra thick. Some of these mutations allow the insects to actually break down the pesticide into a less harmful product. These would just be mutations, just random mutations. So in the picture here, I have all my little insects. The red insect, we've color coded them here. The red one is going to represent the insect that has a mutation that allows it to resist the pesticide. All right, so once again, they have some sort of DNA mutation that allows them to survive when they are sprayed with the pesticide. The little blue ones here, these represent the ones that are normal, okay? So what's going to happen is we have our bugs. If we spray our bugs with our pesticide, we are going to have just a few survivors. So in this case, we've got our one that is resistant, all right, that has that DNA mutation. And maybe these other ones, maybe they ran underneath the leaf when it was sprayed with the pesticide. So we might have a couple other normal survivors. These ones, our survivors, are going to reproduce. And as you all know, bugs can reproduce very rapidly because when they lay eggs, they're not laying one or two or three eggs. They're laying hundreds of eggs at a time. So in reproducing, they are going to pass on their traits. And so that's what you see down here. What you see down here is those bugs have reproduced. And we've got our ones that are resistant, and we have a couple normal ones in there. We spray pesticide again, and once again, it's going to kill most of our normal bugs, and the ones that are resistant, those are the ones that are going to survive. And we keep doing this over many generations, and then we get to a point where all of our insects are now resistant to the pesticide. So all of them, all of our red ones here are going to be our survivors that are going to continue to reproduce and pass on that mutation to their offspring so that their offspring are resistant. So this is actually a picture of a bed bug, and so this is an issue that's happening with in some households. They're having bed bug infestations, and so bed bugs are really kind of a challenge to control because a lot of the pesticides that exterminators use, they don't work on bed bugs. And so there's other techniques that they have to use. There's a heating technique where they bring in basically like these heat fans to heat up the room to essentially like kill the bed bugs by just jacking the temperature up. So I did want to kind of mention bed bugs as kind of a real world example of pesticide resistance. Now, the other example that we're going to talk about is antibiotic resistance. So if you're not sure what an antibiotic is, some of you might have taken an antibiotic in the past. Antibiotics are medicine or is a medicine that kills bacteria cells. It doesn't kill viruses, it kills bacteria cells. So if you have an illness that's caused by bacteria, your doctor will prescribe you an antibiotic so that you can take the medicine and kill the bacteria cells that are causing your illness. So some examples of maybe illnesses you've had that are caused by bacteria would be strep throat. For example, if you've had a urinary tract infection, that would be another example of a illness caused by bacteria. Ear infections would be another one as well. So our bacteria cells, I have a picture here. Our bacteria cells, we've got some bacteria that have DNA that makes them resistant to antibiotics. I have color code in the picture. These are color coded red here. The green ones are like our normal ones. Once again, antibiotic resistance means that when you take the antibiotic, these bacteria are not killed by the antibiotic. They have some sort of mutation that maybe it makes their kind of that their outer capsule like extra thick so the antibiotic doesn't work. So they have some sort of trait that allows them not to be killed. Once again, our bacteria cells that are resistant, those are the ones that are going to survive. So that's what we see here. We see a bunch of bacteria. Person takes the antibiotics. It's going to kill all of the normal ones. The red ones are going to survive. Remember, bacteria, they can just simply reproduce by dividing through asexual reproduction. They're going to reproduce, and in doing so, they're going to pass on the gene. They're going to pass on the gene for antibiotic resistance. So here's just another, this is just another visual here. The purple ones are the normal and the orange ones are the resistant. Here's a bunch of bacteria. You take your antibiotic. Most of the bacteria cells are going to die. We have one normal and one resistant that survive. They are going to start dividing to make more bacteria. And then you take more of your antibiotic. It's going to kill the normal bacteria, and then our resistant bacteria are going to survive, reproduce, and pass on that trait. So one of the issues with antibiotic resistance is they want to educate health professionals, doctors, because doctors are the ones that are writing the prescriptions for antibiotics. They want to make sure that antibiotics are being prescribed only if you really, really do have a bacterial infection. So starting with that. The other thing that health professionals need to be educated about is if you have a bacterial infection, they are going to start you on kind of a weak antibiotic to see if that antibiotic is enough to clear up your infection. And let's say you're on that antibiotic for a couple weeks, then they move you up to maybe one that's a little bit more heavy duty, to see if maybe that will clear up your infection. So doctors are always going to want to kind of start you with a weaker antibiotic, and if your infection continues to progress, then they will continue to kind of up kind of the strength of the antibiotic. One last thing before we wrap up our lesson here, and this is a misconception and kind of a pitfall that students fall into with antibiotic and pesticide resistance. And so I'll go back up to our bugs here. One of the pitfalls that students tend to fall into is they think that because the bugs or the bacteria are being treated with a pesticide or antibiotic, that somehow the bug's DNA will change because they are being sprayed with pesticide or given an antibiotic. And so one of the things I really want to emphasize is that our bugs or our bacteria, they have a DNA mutation. So they have some sort of DNA mutation that makes them resistant, and it's the mutation that's being passed on. It's the mutation that's getting passed on. So it's not like they're getting sprayed with pesticide and the pesticide is somehow um, changing the bug itself, or the antibiotic is changing the bacteria. That's not what's happening. It's the bacteria and the insect or the bug, they already have a DNA mutation that makes them resistant. So that's a misconception that students tend to fall into. Well, that concludes our lesson on natural selection. So hopefully you learned the three goals for this lesson is one, understanding what natural selection is, and two, understanding how pesticide resistance and antibiotic resistance are both examples of natural selection.